Hi, my name is Dr. Naomi Johnson, and I teach in the Communication Studies department. I'm going to talk to you today about an assignment I've been using in my class called Peer-to-Peer Coaching Teams, or P2P teams for short. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the assignment, what it is, what kinds of classes or types of teaching modes that it might work well for, as well as its effectiveness. Then show some sample assignments and talk about how to set it up and evaluate it. So starting off, I am going to talk about what is this P2P teams assignment in the first place. Basically, it is an ongoing student group activity. They meet outside of class, and the focus of their work outside of class is collaboration and discussion related to activities or question prompts that I post on Canvas for them each week. The activities that they were doing is always related to an upcoming class or is in response to readings that they are doing for that class. And so the groups, in this case, I actually assigned based on their shared interest related to course material, and they met over the course of the semester for a number of weeks to get prepared for class. They would submit a weekly memo-style meeting report that would summarize both individual responses to the question prompts as well as sort of the discussion that the team had once they'd had their individual ideas. And so that's asking them basically to synthesize the information together that the team came up with. They also set weekly learning goals related to material in the class, and then they had what I called an accountability report about how they did in meeting that goal each week. And then what I would do is I would use that information. I would look at the report they submitted each week before class, and it was wonderful because I could use it to shape my responses to them in class. Sometimes I would cut and paste examples of strong responses, or I would invite the student teams to share what they did and any concerns or problems they had. I might ask specific people or specific teams to talk about what they wrote about. And so it was really helpful to engage the students in their learning outside of class, to make connections with one another, and then to really use their experiences, both positive and negative, to shape what we were talking about in class, to address their concerns or need for further understanding and demonstrate where they were really getting some good insights out of the material. As far as what kind of classes that you could teach this in person, blended or synchronous classes, online would be perfectly applicable to it. I think you could also adapt it for asynchronous as well. I use it to guide class discussion, but I think you could obviously adapt that to a discussion board or something like that for asynchronous. And as far as the type of content, I really think that it could be adapted to any type of course where you had some sort of ongoing activities. In my class, I used it for several long-term projects to have them do things in phases. It could also be used for labs, not necessarily a long-term project, but some type of activity that you did every week or regularly, like a lab. Or even if you have discussions in your class every week, it's really good for feeding that. So it's really kind of highly adaptable to a lot of different modes and a lot of different topics. As far as how do I know that it worked? Well, the reports that the team submitted, they were really excellent. A lot of them had some very thoughtful ideas, some very honest evaluation of where they were getting frustrated so that I could adjust to that and address it. Really thoughtful work came in on those P2P reports. The class discussion was another piece of evidence that I can point to, which is that basically it was really great to bring up points that I would have never anticipated if I hadn't been reading their responses. It also had the great benefit of ensuring that students were prepared for class because they had to work on this material in advance, often related to a reading that they were doing or some other type of assigned viewing or activity I had for them, so that they basically were prepared because they had already done it. And then some people had also referenced it in a final reflection paper I had in the course, and it came up in the course evaluations. It is, in all honesty, possible to, quote, fake your way through this. I could tell in some cases, although I could not prove it, that there were times that they would just, write up their individual responses, and then one person would like summarize what they had all said individually. But out of the 8 teams I had in this last semester, there was only one team that didn't really gel, that it seemed to me was doing this regularly. But overall, it felt like, based on the quality of the reports and the discussion in class, students really enjoyed this and got a lot out of it. All right, so I wanted to show you some example assignments that I created. I worked first on creating discussion prompts or activities for that very first peer-to-peer team meeting so that they could help to get to know one another first, to create some familiarity between the students. And then I also worked to create ongoing components of every week. When they would put a report, there were some things that would reoccur every week, like the accountability goals that I mentioned. And by doing that, you have, first of all, the familiarity with one another, but then you also have at least some elements of the work they're doing together that feel familiar to them, that helps them start feeling some competence and ability to do the work well. So let me show you an example of a report that I assigned. For this particular class, it is a professional development class. It's a 1-credit class to help them get ready for a life after graduation. So this is the very first meeting that they had. I will talk about what the team contract is once I get up to the setting up portion of the assignment. But what they did as far as like getting to know one another, is I just asked them some kind of open-ended questions just to get them to connect, but it's also related to the class material as well. So these were the first 3 bullet points here were questions that I had them kind of describe their own backgrounds and their own interests. Of course, this could be adapted to any class, and thinking about just some things to get them to open up and how their experiences might relate to the class, and interests they have in class and fears they have about the class. This 4th bullet gets into material that they were assigned to do for the next class period. And so basically I referenced them very specifically to the LinkedIn Masterclass. This is an online video series basically that they were assigned to review. So I said, open up that Masterclass video, go to step 1 in the video, and there are 3 strategies listed there. I want you to pick one of those strategies and practice actually doing it together. I gave them some instructions on if they're working remotely, how they might share their screens. And basically then I want them to discuss, how does it go? And then here's the accountability goal that I mentioned. At the end of each meeting, each member should come up with an individual accountability goal. And this is basically getting them to apply some of the material that they've used in class to try it out before the next meeting. The second element of this, besides the discussion prompts then, is I give them instructions on what the report should actually include. And I did have them always have specifically when was the meeting starting and ending. This is like a memo format basically. The full names of the people present, including the amount of time present for anyone who wasn't there the entire time. Students were remarkably honest about this as far as I could tell. I definitely got reports where some people would note that they had to leave early. A lot of times they would write why they had to leave early. And for my personal pedagogy, if they were, not egregious about it, I, let them, shape this as long as it seemed like they were getting a lot out of it. I just let them shape this to, adapt to their life. This was during the fall semester of the pandemic, the first pandemic of 2020. Sorry, the hopefully the only pandemic. Anyhow, I wanted to give them some flexibility because of the circumstances, I guess is my point. That would, of course, be up to you if you wanted to follow up with students if they were consistently being late. I just didn't have any trouble with people who weren't doing this consistently and staying the whole time. And then basically, I want their report to include this information. So I've kind of divided this up into two areas. One is the discussion prompts to like give them specific information like open your LinkedIn masterclass. And then the second part of the assignment is what should be in your actual report. And so I gave them out of this information, what do I need you to write down in it? And then I gave them some format. I personally gave them a lot of leeway on this. Depending on your needs, you might want to give them a more specific template. But I just basically told them that they needed to clearly identify each item that I've requested with a heading so that I knew it was there. A number of them took me up on the option to copy and paste the prompts in the report. That made it really super easy for me to identify the information was there. So that's an example of the very first one. To see quickly a follow-up assignment once we got further into it. So you can see here I've asked, how did you do on your accountability goal from last week? That was what I started with every single week. After the first week, how did you do on your accountability goal for the last week? Talk together if you didn't accomplish it. Do you have any suggestions about what would help complete the goal so that they're kind of working together? Here again, you can see that I'm referencing very specific items from class, going back to that video series. I tell them to look at some specific items in there and then to work together, craft messages that you would use to contact individuals that you want to do an informational interview with. And then when we came back together in class, it was great because they had each team had a message template crafted, and we shared them and everybody could look at how other teams had written them. We like word crafted some things in class. It worked out really, really well. And then of course at the end for my assignment, come up with a new individual accountability goal. So the first item and the last item for me was always, how did you do on your accountability goal for last week? What is it for next week? And you could adapt that to make it something related to your course. You know, what is your goal for the next week, even if it's like a little sub goal to go toward a larger goal that you want to do to be successful in the class. And then the second portion of this, again, I just repeat what should be in this actual report. And I would do that for every single week. Basically, I gave them discussion prompts. I referenced them to specific material from the class. And then the second part, I told them how to write it up. All right, so let me get back to our slides. Okay, so how to set this up. Basically, you just need to decide if you want to create the teams randomly or if you want to create them on some sort of shared interest or goals. I personally put them in teams related to shared career interests or going to graduate school so that they had that commonality between them. It's really important to communicate about a number of things. You want to make sure that you're avoiding the perception that you're having them do busy work, especially since you're asking them to meet outside of class. So you want to communicate how specifically these activities are related to learning outcomes, assignments, exams. That's really important that students have a really clear understanding as to why they're doing this each week. I think it's also helpful to identify for them some of the soft skills that come out of this, the role of collaboration, the role of teamwork, and how that's important in academics as well as the professional world. Most people do not work alone, they work on teams. So it's nice to reinforce for them why this matters. And then, of course, communicate the format that you want for your reports. Then one thing that's really important on the front end, I do this in class when I go over the assignment. I have them right then and there, once they get into their teams, have them establish a weekly meeting time and go ahead and put it on their calendars for the entire time that you have them want them to meet. So I had them meeting weeks 4 through 10 of the semester. So I just said, here's the dates. Every week, you have the same meeting time, put it on your calendar for the whole rest of the week, because otherwise all you're going to be doing is setting up times over and over and over again every week, and people are going to be missing. So get them to commit. Also get them to commit where they're going to meet, or if they want to do it on Zoom or FaceTime or whatever, how are they going to do that? And then to create mutually agreed upon expectations for working and communicating in the team. And that is the team contract. So let me show you that. I think this team contract is a big part of the reason that we didn't have a lot of issues with people not showing up and doing the work as expected. So as part of their first week's P2P report, I actually had them include all of this information. So you'll notice I say the first thing you need to do is you need to put in your, where do we put, in your first, once you have established a team contract, that's the first thing you discuss, and then you had to turn that in separately. All right, so the things that they did in that discussion, how do they want to be contacted? They always had to have the information that was assigned for the next class read or viewed before they met as a team, so that they weren't coming unprepared to that team meeting. So they as a group need to decide. So let's say your class that you're going to be using this in is going to be on a Wednesday. So you know on Wednesdays is when you're going to bring in your P2P reports. So you should have your stuff posted for them well in advance, so that they can have that flexibility as a team and know that it's going to be up. So I would tell them, like, if we're going to use it on a Wednesday, I will have the materials you need to read up by the previous week on, say, I don't know, Wednesday. And then you decide as a team sometime over that week of Wednesday to the next Wednesday when you're turning it in, like, when are you going to meet and when will you commit to having the stuff read by? So they would come up with things like, okay, well, we will have all read or viewed whatever material is assigned by Saturday, and then we're going to meet on Monday night or whatever it was. So they have to come up with some sort of idea of when it is they're going to have the assignment basically for reading or viewing done to be prepared, and then when is it that they're going to actually meet. And also, how are you going to meet on Zoom or what other platform? I think it's also super important to tell them how much time to schedule. Of course, this is going to vary depending on what types of prompts you give them, but I told them to schedule an hour to make sure they had enough time to do it. I don't think it took them an hour most of the time, but I wanted it on their schedules. And then I just asked them to basically talk through some of their ideas about how they should interact with each other and their behaviors in the meeting, and ask them to talk through some of their ideas about, like, what happens if somebody has connectivity problems? What happens if somebody's running late or they want to leave the meeting early? Like, what are your expectations of each other over this? And then, of course, who's responsible for submitting the weekly meeting summaries? That's up to them how they want to set that up. I did put in a requirement that everybody should write a meeting summary over the course of the semester, that it shouldn't just be one person all the time, because I wanted everybody involved. And then basically have them talk about anything else that was important. I think that really helps set them up for success, because if they run into problems as the semester goes on, especially if they come to you, you can always reference back to, well, what did you all agree upon? Do you need to make some modifications to this contract? Is it not working for you? So I think that's particularly important in just getting this set up and setting up everybody for success. The Google Doc, I'm sure you have run into the problem if you use Google Docs yourself, where the student forgets to share it with you and you can't access it. I suggest having a Google Doc, because one, just like one ongoing Google Doc for every single meeting. just from a logistical standpoint, that's handy because they only have to remember to share it with you and create themselves as editors once rather than every single week. So you don't run into those kind of problems. But it's also really nice to have just one ongoing Google Doc, because that way they can go back. If you're building, on something, they can go back and see what they've done previously really easily, as can you, without trying to find all these different folders and files of like, what did they do last week? Okay, well, what did they do in week 4? You can just easily scroll up and down in that document and identify some trends or things they'd previously said they were going to do. I just found that to be really useful. All right. And then finally, how do you evaluate it? For me, this was a low stakes assignment in terms of the report, but there was a number of them, so they all added up over time. So if people didn't do them well over time, there was a problem. But really, I just wanted to get them together to just talk about this. And I just to me, this was almost checkmark grading. Like, I just kind of skimmed it to make sure that all the discussion prompts were addressed in a thorough manner, that it was formatted in the way that I required, and that it was organized basically so that I could find the information, and that there was written at least, coherently. And so that is how I evaluated it. Everybody got the same grade as long as they were there, either the whole time or the majority of the time. And of course, if somebody wasn't there, then I just gave them a 0 for that particular meeting report. So that's it. I hope you find it helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. It's Naomi Johnson, johnsonnr@longwood.edu. or you can dial me at extension 2230. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.